We've spent a lot of this semester talking about the logic side of persuasion and argumentation. And uh, we've looked at things like reasons, hidden assumptions, a post hoc fallacy, and other kinds of fallacies that are really common. We've looked at evidence. These are all really important skills to develop, being able to use these different things and analyze texts and analyze arguments from a logical perspective. Very important. But if that's all I gave you this semester, it would really be very incomplete because we're also emotional people, emotional animals, and we're driven by emotions. And those emotions often affect how we find things persuasive or not. And we talked about that when we looked at ethos and pathos. In addition, when you're thinking and forming your own opinions, not even just trying to persuade somebody else, but just thinking through what is it you believe about life, you're also influenced by a lot of different emotions. There's a strong psychological component to thinking, to critical thinking, persuasion, but also to how you form good opinions and make good judgments and decisions. So we're going to look today at that psychological side, and we're going to look at some common errors in our judgments and decisions. And these common errors are things that affect everybody. And we're going to look at these, and by becoming aware of common pitfalls or common ways that people tend to err in their thinking, from a psychological perspective, once we understand that, then we can take steps to avoid this kind of issue in our own lives, our own decisions, and our own judgments and evaluations and interpretations. So the goal here is to give you some skills, and by the end of this, you'll start to develop the ability to recognize your own biases, your own kind of malfunctioning thinking, and take steps to improve that. I suspect that if you can do this, it will greatly help your decisions and your interpretation of life. It's helped me personally. I can tell you, learning these things has made me a much better person, a much better interpreter of other people and other situations, and a much better decider. So the first problem, the root of the problem, is that life is very ambiguous. It's not always clear what things mean. Life is uncertain. We don't know what the future is going to hold, and it's very confusing. Things look one way and they're really another. Because of this fundamental ambiguity and confusion in life, it makes decision making and interpreting very difficult. But we can't just not interpret. Some people say, well, just, you think what you think and I think what I think, and everybody's okay, and we're all going to sing kumbaya, and nothing really matters. Okay. But we have to interpret in life. We have to make sense of things. And some interpretations are wrong. We have to make decisions and form opinions. It's just necessary to do in life. And some opinions are wrong. We have to make decisions. And the right decision really matters. It's not always equally good to go one route or another. There are good decisions and bad decisions. So the question is, how can we make better decisions? How can we form more accurate opinions? Now, this is not just from a logical side, but from a psychological side as well. We've talked a lot about logic training. We spent a lot of this semester looking at evidence and reasons and things like that. But there is a big psychological side to thinking. Once we understand that psychological side, we can interpret better, we can make better decisions. So the first way to think of this is to think of two systems of thinking. So system one is what we call intuitive thinking, or quick thinking, fast thinking. you can see right here immediately, without having to really analyze the situation, that this guy's angry. Nothing, no instruction is required, all right? No analysis is required. System 2 is slow, methodical thinking, 17 times 24. Now, instantly, you know a couple things. You know it's a math problem. You know it's going to be difficult. You know it's going to take a little calculation to figure it out, but probably with a little bit of effort, you could do it. But in order to actually solve that problem, you'd have to not rely on your intuitions and your quick thinking. You're going to have to do some calculation. That's system 2, is slow thinking, maybe analytical thinking. So what are some of the qualities of these different things? All right. So automatically makes sense of things. It's fast and easy. It's instinctual, or you have learned associations and habits. All right. So things like detecting one object as more distant than another. If you hear a sudden sound and you orient yourself to where that's coming from. Phrases like bread and, bread and water, or bread and butter, or something like that. 2 + 2 equals, that in the same way. If you're driving a car on an empty road, if you're an experienced driver, understanding simple sentences, recognizing stereotypes, all of that is intuitive thinking. You do it quickly, easily, without a problem. So the basic pattern is that's what we use most of the time. When you're walking to class, when you're going about your business, this intuitive thinking is doing its job, okay? And when things are easy and make sense and you don't have any problems, things seem true and pleasant, and your vigilance goes down, okay? The reason we use this a lot of times is it does work a lot. This intuitive thinking is very functional, and it allows us to save mental and even physical resources for other things. So it doesn't require too much work, all right? System 2, it would be engaged conscious thinking. This requires attention, focus, energy, and effort. This is the part of our minds that are responsible for self-control and willpower. It deals with complex things, rules, choices, comparisons. It's a little unpleasant to use this, okay? I know, for example, math problems, if I actually have to sit and do a math problem, it's a little unpleasant, okay? It doesn't drive me nuts, but it's like I'd rather not. I'd rather just go to a calculator. Here would be some examples of engaged conscious thinking. If you're bracing for the start of a race, you're mentally engaged, you're focused. You're in a crowded room at a party or in class, and you hear a lot of voices, and you're trying to focus on that one voice that's talking to you, and you're trying to block out all the others. You're searching your memory for something. What's the right word? What happened then? You monitor your appropriate behavior in a social situation. You're at a really fancy dinner and you're on your best behavior. You're not familiar with the rules here. That requires this engaged conscious thinking. Maybe you have to park in a very narrow space, and you got to pay attention. You got to focus. Comparing computers for overall value, checking the validity of an argument, solving a math problem. That's all engaged conscious thinking. A lot of what you're doing in class is engaged conscious thinking. Reading is usually going to be that also. All right. The basic division of labor is that system 2, this engaged conscious thinking, only comes into force when system 1 struggles or fails. So the basic division of labor is something like this. Number 1 goes on autopilot. Number 2 is in a low effort mode. You're not really accessing your conscious full mental powers, okay? Number 1 will generate suggestions. And this seems true. And number 2 will just endorse it, stamp it. Yep, you're right, you're right, you're right, okay? That looks like a tree. Yeah, it's a tree. Stamp it and move on, All right. Now, number two is activated when number one struggles or fails, when something doesn't make sense. Okay, you thought this was a tree, but wait a minute, it's not a tree. It's moving. Okay, it's walking. All right. So now system two has to come in, and you're engaged, and you're conscious, and you're really trying to focus your interpretation. And here's the key point of today's lesson: is number two has to overcome impulses and biases of system one. So we're going to learn about some tendencies or biases, they're called biases of system one, that are very common and very predictable in humans. And normally, if we're not aware of those biases, we're going to keep doing them because it's on autopilot, it's working, there's no problem, okay? But once we become aware of these, then we know the situations when we need to use our active, engaged thinking. Take this as an example, okay? Which line is longer? All right, well, the top line looks longer, all right? But if you measure these, you will actually see, you could pause this if you like, and you can measure them. The lines are the same. This line right here is the same as this line right here in length, okay? It just looks longer. This one looks longer. All right, so that's a cognitive illusion, or a visual illusion. And it's not a big deal. Doesn't really matter which line is longer, but your system one tells you that the top is longer, all right? Now that you know this, by the way, and somebody presents this to you again, you'll know the answer. You'll know that they're the same length, and system two will click in and say, I remember that. I remember that from that lecture. They're the same length, all right? So in the same way, there are cognitive illusions. There are ways of thinking that make us think something is true when it's not true. And only by becoming consciously aware of them can we not be fooled. All right. So here are some terms. Cognitive errors of system one, we use some terms, biases especially, okay? Now, bias has a moralistic meaning. Bias means racism or ageism or sexism or something like that. That's kind of a moral interpretation of this. We're not being moralistic here. We're being, maybe if you're going to think of a vice, think of an intellectual vice. A bias is just a predictable pattern of error in judging and deciding. It's a pattern of error. It's some error that happens a lot, and it's predictable because it happens to everybody. So whereas some people are very racist and some people are not, everyone has these biases. Everyone has these cognitive biases, okay? I've been studying these for many years. I'm very aware of them. I have them, okay? And all I have to do is I have to recognize the situations when they are likely to kick in and not let them hijack my thinking, all right? A heuristic. This is a simple technique for interpreting. So your system one uses a lot of these heuristics, these simple techniques for interpreting things. A rule of thumb is another word. It works a lot, okay? They're not terrible things, but there are cases when they don't work. So the key lesson for today is the only way to avoid certain errors is to be aware of their prevalence, realize when they're likely to occur, and be vigilant, their system two, to when the situation arises. So if you can recognize when you're likely to be biased or when you're likely to make errors in judgment and decision making, then hopefully you'll be able to recognize those situations, you'll become vigilant, and you'll take corrective action. All right, so the first bias is famous and very, very common. It's called confirmation bias. And confirmation bias means we seek evidence to confirm our opinions, and we ignore or rationalize evidence to the contrary. So if I believe that Albanians are jerks, all right, then every time I hear about Albanians, I'm going to look for evidence that fits that. And if there's a wonderful non-jerk Albanian that I come across, I'm either going to ignore that or I'll rationalize as, it's just an exception, okay? So this is called confirmation bias. And confirmation bias is rooted in the effort to avoid cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance, what's that? Cognitive dissonance means holding two contrary opinions at the same time, okay? Albanians are jerks. You're an Albanian and you're a great person. Those two things don't fit, okay? That's called, and when I have those two things happening at the same time, I experience cognitive dissonance, and it's an unpleasant feeling. Much of our mental life is an effort to avoid cognitive dissonance, to iron that out. Now, this happens when I have self-interest involved, especially if my pay depends on me believing a certain thing, I'm more likely to believe it. But even in the absence of self-interest, I just have a natural tendency to try to confirm my beliefs, okay? This explains a lot of our poor decisions and illusions. So let's say I have something like this. If a card has a vowel on one side, then it has an even number on the other, all right? So I'm saying if it has a vowel on one side, then the other side has an even number. So which card or cards do we need to turn over to test this claim, okay? I want to turn over as few as possible, all right? So take a second, pause the video, and try to decide what the answer is to test that claim, which card or cards you have to turn over. So pause it. So what would you have to turn over? Well, everybody can recognize you have to turn over E, because if E has an odd number, then that will prove that that's wrong, right? I don't need to turn over K. The sentence doesn't have anything to do with consonants. I don't even have to turn over number 4, because number 4, even if it has a consonant, that's not the statement. The statement's only saying if it has a vowel on one side, then it has an even number on the other. So it doesn't matter what it has on the opposite side of the 4. Now, most people are not going to pick out number 7, but you do have to pick out number 7. Because if I turn over number 7 and it has a vowel, it disproved that point. So what happens, most people don't pick out number 7. First time I did this, I didn't pick it out because I wasn't looking to disprove the statement. I was looking to prove it. And in the same way, we look for evidence to prove something, not to disprove it. For example, if you have an assignment on immigration and you're writing about how immigration maybe is harmful for America, you will naturally and normally seek out information that proves that point. And you will not seek out information that disproves it, because you're trying to avoid cognitive dissonance. You're doing the confirmation bias. This happens in a lot of situations in life. This is the what the hell effect. Let's say you're at the top of the pyramid and you could either go one way. You could cheat, you could not cheat. Neither way, you know, you're kind of 50-50, all right? Now let's say you cheat, all right? You take one step down this little pyramid. Now, if you want to back out of this, you have to do two things. You have to not only go the other way, but you have to admit that your first decision was wrong. Well, we don't like to admit that our decisions are wrong. So we're more likely to get deeper into that and do a second step. And then let's say things are not going too well. I could either keep going and get deeper into that, or I could admit that I was wrong not once, but twice. That's really hard to do. So a lot of times we go deeper into this. This is how people, not just cheating and not cheating, but let's say you're in an abusive relationship, okay? You get with somebody, it's good at first. Let's say you get abused, okay? Now you say, well, if I want to dump this relationship, I have to not only change everything. I have to admit the last month or year of my life has been wasted. I've gone the wrong decision. That's really hard to do. I'm going to keep investing some more. Maybe this person will change. Maybe I keep investing the same way, it'll get better. And then you go deeper. Now it's 10 years down the line. Things have gotten worse. You're thinking of changing. Gosh, now not only do you have to change, which is hard, but you have to admit the last 10 years have been a waste of your life. Really hard to do. Same thing goes with money thrown at something. Okay, you're the head of a business and you say, well, I'm going to invest in this certain direction. Okay, you find it's not going well. You could either keep investing more or you could admit that what you did was wrong and go the other way. Very difficult to do that. That's why a lot of people throw bad money, throw good money after bad. Okay, it's called, because you keep digging yourself deeper and deeper, because it's really hard to go back and admit that your initial month, year, $100,000, whatever, was wasted. So a question to think about for yourself is, have you changed your mind? Think about all the essays you've written this semester. Have you gone into the essay thinking one thing, and because of the data that you've read and all your reading, come to a difference of opinion? If you have, that's a great sign. That's a sign of some mental flexibility. It's not a sign of flip-flopping and not a sign of being wishy-washy. It's a sign that you're responsive to facts, and that you're not digging in deeper. All right. So this confirmation bias really comes up in a lot of very interesting ways. All right. Let's take, for example, the following. So let's look at memory. How we remember things often fits with our current view of things, all right? So there's an experiment that was done. And in the experiment, people would view a film clip of two cars getting in an accident, okay? They watch this video. Then afterwards, they're asked about the accident, and they asked to estimate how fast the cars were going when they made contact, okay? But the verb they used was different. So they said, how fast were they going when they smashed? And just using that word smashed caused people to interpret backwards and remember it as being faster. They said it was 40.8 miles per hour. They used a different word, collided. That's a little less than smashed. The speed went down in their memory. It went down to 39.3. When they bumped, said, how fast were they going when they bumped? They said 38 miles an hour. When they said they hit, even less, they said 34. And when they used the verb contacted, they said 31 miles an hour. So a big range based on the question being asked and the verbs that it is used, and it causes to kind of remember backwards in a certain way. Another, and again, this is a form of a confirmation bias, right? I'm seeking to confirm my memory with the current use of the verb, okay? Halo effect is another kind of confirmation bias. In the halo effect, if somebody is physically attractive, they're also interpreted to be positive in other ways. We don't like to think of somebody being beautiful and stupid and disgusting. All right. We don't like to think of somebody as being ugly, but smart and elegant and sophisticated. They're dissonant kind of things. So we tend to judge beautiful people as being more intelligent, happier, better leaders, that kind of thing. Now, there are two kind of things that are opposite that are both kind of relevant to this. Is the primacy effect and the recency effect. The primacy effect just says whatever happened first has a bigger effect on you, and you seek things to go along with that. So, for example, if I read a list and I said, Alan, here's Alan. Let me tell you about Alan. He's intelligent, industrious, impulsive, critical, stubborn, and envious. Now, Ben, on the other hand, is envious, stubborn, critical, impulsive, industrious, intelligent. Well, that's the same list, but it's a different sequence. The good things came first for Alan. The bad things came first for Ben. People are way more likely to choose Alan in a favorable light because the positive things came first. It's the same thing as first impressions. If you have a very good first impression of somebody, that sticks with you. If you have a very bad impression of somebody, first impression, it may take a long time to overcome that with a lot of good behavior. Recency effect is the opposite. It's just the most recent thing stands out in your mind. Okay, but both of this is a kind of confirmation bias. I'm seeking, if I've got things that are good and bad, I don't like that. Okay, I want to kind of group it all in the good or all in the bad. Neglecting ambiguity. A lot of times things are open to multiple interpretations. And with the confirmation bias, we'll put things into a meaningful slot to make it make sense, whether it fits there or not. We will tend to suppress doubt. Okay, if I'm doubtful about something, I'm not so sure, I'll tend to suppress that because I don't want it to be inconsistent with my positive feelings towards something. Let's see here. All right, Meg Whitman. So I don't know if any of you know Meg Whitman. She was a super successful CEO. She took over eBay when it had 30 employees and $4 million in annual revenue. And she brought it up to 15,000 employees and $8 billion in annual revenue. Currently, she's the CEO of Hewlett Packard. So after she left eBay, she ran for governor of California. She spent more of her own money on the race than any other political candidate spent on a single election in American history, spending $144 million of her own fortune and another $178 million, including donors. All right. So she put a lot of personal investment into this, and she lost. So here's my question. Based on what I've said about confirmation bias and avoiding cognitive dissonance, how do you think she responded to that loss? Well, let's watch a video. Whoa, hold on a second here. Oops. Here we go.
California because as the CEO of eBay, I saw the challenges that businesses in California faced. I saw the financial straits that our state was in. And I thought I could make a difference by bringing a Silicon Valley innovative perspective to what I thought was a government structure that hadn't changed in years and was no longer serving the best that California deserved. So took it up and spent about 2.5 years running for governor. There were highlights and there were lowlights. The best thing was I learned a lot about government. I learned a lot about California. Got a chance to see California the way virtually no other Californians have seen it. I learned a lot about things I didn't know about, so that was quite fun. But it's a tough business. It's very competitive. It's very combative. It takes a great deal of courage. It was the experience of a lifetime.
The experience of a lifetime. She's looking at the positive side. It's great. Yeah, boy, I'm glad I did that. Okay, good for you. Gamblers. Here's another example of confirmation bias. So scientists studied the thinking of gamblers and wondered, okay, why do they keep gambling even though the chances of losing outweigh the chances of winning, and the experience of losing outweighs the experience of winning? You're just statistically, you're going to lose a lot more. You might win some, but you're going to lose some. So they interviewed gamblers when they had a victory and when they had a loss. And they said, why did you win and why did you lose in those cases? Think about this for a minute. In terms of cognitive dissonance, what do you think they're going to say? What would be their answer? So pause this for a minute, think about it. So the answer is that they attributed their victory to their skill. I won because I'm really good at this. And when they lost, it was some random circumstance. If I got rid of that silly circumstance, it would have worked out great for me. Take a look at this. All right. So we have a picture that could be two different things. Now you'll notice it could be two different things. It could be an old woman or a young woman. All right. So I'll show you. So if it's an old woman, this is her eye. This is a nose. This is a wart on her nose. This is her nose, and this is her mouth. All right. And this is her hair. And so there's an old woman. Or she's a young woman looking away. This is her nose. She's looking off to the distance. This is her ear. This is a necklace. All right. So notice what you're doing here. You're fitting the details of the picture into one frame or another. These frames of reference are called paradigms. So you have a paradigm. This is a young woman, and all the facts are going to fit into that. Or this is an old woman, and all the facts are going to fit into that. So this is kind of a metaphor for how we work mentally. We have these paradigms. We have these mental frameworks of how the world works, and we fit the details to fit into our mental framework. And it's really shocking when you come across a different mental framework and see how people fit the facts into those. All right, another kind of bias is called the expectancy effect. The expectancy effect means we see what we look for or we expect to see. So some examples. So the drunk experiment is an amusing one. So say 20 men were given alcohol or told they were given alcohol to drink, okay? Actually, only half of them had the alcohol. The other half had liquid that was non-alcoholic, okay? Virgin daiquiris, okay? Virgin margaritas or something like that, okay? So, and then later they were interviewed by an attractive woman, okay, as part of the experiment. So in both all sets of guys talked with the woman with confidence and verve and excitement, and the ones who thought they were drunk talked more confidently. They gave another group no alcohol, and they said no alcohol. This is just water you're drinking, right? They were nervous. They were awkward and stumbling because they didn't think they were drunk. So the guys who thought they were drunk acted as if they were drunk, okay? Hostile media effect is another one. And you see this nowadays a lot, okay? People who have a certain, well, the original study was done with Israeli and Arabs. They were shown some video clips of news clips, and the Israelis thought that the news was biased against them, and the Palestinians thought the news was biased against them. Both of them were expecting the bias, were expecting to be picked on, and that's what they saw. Another example is the awareness test. Where's my awareness test? All right, let's say we take this. Let's go back to this slide for a minute, okay? The pattern here on these biases is like this. A microphone picks up a noise. it amplifies it and it comes out as a speaker, and that feeds back into that microphone. In the same way, if you have a cognitive illusion, it feeds itself, you can see, because you're looking for information, you're seeking information that proves your point. So this is how illusions can remain. Now, let's say we take this experiment. This is a great experiment. And just the thing is, look and see what card you see. All right? Very simple. Okay, looks simple enough. Just a bunch of cards. But look really carefully. Okay, maybe you caught something a little odd there. All right, maybe more you caught it. Let's say it out loud this time. All right. I got a 7 of spades, ace of diamonds, 9 of clubs, 6 of, wait a minute. At first I thought this was a 6 of hearts, but it's not a heart, it's a spade. Now most people see a 6 of hearts, not a 6 of spades. Why? Because you don't expect to see a red spade. Spades are black, right? And so what this is illustrating is the expectancy effect. You expect to see something, so you don't see certain things. You're literally invisible to certain things. Try this one more time. How many passes does the team in white make?
This is an awareness test. How many passes does the team in white make? The answer is 13. But you see the moonwalking bear.
It's easy to miss something you're not looking for. Oh, that's the expectancy effect. If you're not expecting to see something, you're not going to, right? And again, it's very similar to the confirmation bias, but in this case, it's really focused on just expectations. Okay, this is all about stereotypes, right? Same kind of issue. Availability bias is another common kind of bias. What you see is all there is. Means that you tend to focus on existing or easy to retrieve evidence. You ignore absent or difficult to retrieve evidence, okay? This always happens to me when I'm in a lane that's going really slow, okay? If I'm in the slow traffic and I see the cars zipping by me, I think I'm in the slow lane, okay? And when I get into a faster lane, I don't think about it because I'm not conscious or upset or irritated about how slow I'm going. So I always think I'm in the wrong lane, and I'm always switching lanes. Okay, I'm in the wrong lane. Why do I always pick the wrong lane? It's not that I'm always picking the wrong lane. It's that I'm aware of when I'm not in the right lane, and I'm never aware of when I'm going smoothly. Grandma smoked, so it's okay. This is, again, a classic availability bias. You're aware of grandma who lived to 100 and smoked. It's such a vivid fact in your mind that all the people who died because of smoking are not in your mind, okay? Here's a good example. Ebola. Ebola's all in the news. Everybody's upset. You're all worried about it. we have a lot more worries from obesity, tobacco, and alcohol. Okay? So think about things that are in the news that are very startling and very alarming, but statistically, they're really not that big a deal. Okay? Driving is really a lot more dangerous than getting shot by guns or getting attacked by terrorists. Okay? Those events, terrorism and mass shootings, are dramatic and they stick in your mind, but they're very tiny statistically compared to everyday things that we do without thinking about it. Another kind of bias is jumping to conclusions. Okay, we've talked a lot this semester about needing to provide a lot of evidence and hasty generalizations, things like this. Well, there's a reason I had to mention that, because we do it all the time. It's part of our intuitive system one thinking. We tend to form generalizations based on limited data. I meet a couple of lousy Albanians and I think all Albanians are jerks, okay? Another kind of jumping to conclusion is to see a correlation where there's merely a coincidence, okay? I ate Mexican food and then I woke up with a knee pain the next day, okay? Maybe that Mexican food caused the knee pain, all right? It's probably just a coincidence, but I'm seeing a correlation. Or to see a cause where there's merely a correlation, okay? And this is again related to the post hoc fallacy, but it means that maybe two things tend to go together, okay? But one might cause the other, but the other might cause the first thing. We don't know for sure. Or there may be a third issue that's causing both of them. We infer intention based on limited data, all right? My next door neighbor left his dog pooped on my lawn, okay? It happened again. Now I think it's intentional. This guy's out to mess my lawn. That dog is out to get me, all right? Well, that's limited data. I've got two examples. It's not necessarily true that this person is out to get me. And this relates to something called the fundamental attribution error. The fundamental attribution error means that we interpret other people's behavior as a reflection of their character or personality, not the circumstances. When I do things, I usually interpret it based on the circumstances. So if I didn't do very well on a test, I think, well, I didn't sleep well. I was confused. I was distracted by certain things. I'm going to attribute it situationally. When somebody else does poorly on a test, I'm going to say, that's a bad student, okay? That student is lazy and just doesn't study, all right? So in the same way, it's an error. It's just an error to attribute everything to somebody's personality when it's them, and only situations when it's me. That's an error. Things are sometimes dispositional, sometimes it's somebody's personality, but a lot of times it's just a situation. Another cognitive error. This is called a cognitive error because it's an easy thing to do. We have a natural, instinctive desire to get along with other people. We don't want to violate social norms and cause friction with differences of opinion. And so we tend to conform to the group. There was a really interesting experiment done 50 or 60 years ago that measured this. And you can see exhibit 1 on the left is a line, and then exhibit 2, you've got 3 lines, and line A is the same length as exhibit 1. And students were given, or people were given this series and say which line is the same, and people can pick it out right. 99.99% of the time they're going to pick the correct line. But what happens when things happen in a group? Let's watch a video.
The experiment you'll be taking part in today involves the perception of lengths of lines. As you can see here, I have a number of cards, and on each card there are several lines. Your task is a very simple one. You're to look at the line on the left and determine which of the three lines on the right is equal to it in length. All right, we'll proceed in this order. You'll get your answer.
Only one of the people in the group is a real subject, the fifth person with the white t-shirt. The others are confederates of the experimenter and have been told to give wrong answers on some of the trials. The experiment begins uneventfully as subjects give their judgments.
Two. Three.
But on the third trial, something happens.
Two.
The subject denies the evidence of his own eyes and yields to group influence. Ash found subjects went along with the group on 37% of the critical trials.
So what happens in that is people are doing what we call a form of groupthink. In groupthink, a whole group of people conform to each other. They perceive that everybody thinks a certain way, and so they think that certain way, or at least verbalize those things. Even though they think privately one thing, they're going to verbalize another. This is a serious problem. You see this in politics. For example, the Bay of Pigs evasion was a very famous example. Operation Iraqi Freedom was another example where the whole group that was in charge of government at the time, the decision makers, reinforced each other's opinions, and they believed they were invulnerable. They led to excessive optimism and risk-taking. Whenever there was a warning sign or some sort of doubt, collectively they rationalized that away, or they discounted those warnings. There was an unquestioned belief in that in-group's morality. We're the good guys. People who oppose us have bad motives. They stereotyped their adversaries as evil, weak, or stupid. So people who disagreed with them were somehow bad or ignorant. Pressure directed at group members with dissenting views. So if somebody started to voice some dissent, there was a lot of pressure put on those people to get back into line. An illusion of unanimity. So they believed that everybody thought the same, even though there was a lot of difference of opinion, but those things were suppressed, those differences. A kind of self-censorship that would go on for anybody who was deviating. Self-appointed mind guards who protect ideological purity. So if somebody kind of goes off course, or starts to voice a difference of opinion, maybe one very powerful person or group of people will come down on that person and put pressure on that person to conform. The groupthink's a serious problem, and this goes back to the Asch experiments. There's just a tendency, there's an emotional need to get along with people, and that can spill over into our opinions. Going back to the Asch experiment, when the Confederates, when there was one person in the Confederates who did not agree, then that gave the experimental subject a lot more courage to stand up and tell the truth. This psychology of groupthink was really powerfully illustrated in the whole phenomenon of fake news. So during the 2016 election, the Russian government led an effort to mess with our democracy by exploiting group biases. And so they put out a lot of things, either anti-Hillary, some anti-Trump, more was pro-Trump, but a lot of anti-Hillary, to get people's biases stoked up and to get their groupthink and their confirmation bias to get people to say, yeah, we hate Hillary. And so they produced a lot of these really interesting things to focus on certain groups. They all targeted certain groups, you know, anti-Muslim or gun rights. A lot of our biases. Satan, if I win, Clinton wins, not if I can help it. I love it. Satan's really tuned in there. Jesus has got it easy. Okay, this is like me against my kid. Okay, okay, go Jesus. You're going to win this one, right? Now, it wasn't just anti-Hillary. Okay, they appealed to any kind of subgroup in our society to stoke their resentment and hostility and their fears. Not always in good English, but these examples of fake news, you know, they did both sides. They did the Black Lives Matter and the Blue Lives Matter, and they put out things just to stimulate group orientation. There were pro-Bernie, there were anti-Bernie. Once Trump did get elected, they put out anti-Trump things. Anything to stoke our group sentiments, all right? So a lot of what this says is the real value of independent thinking. The independent thinking gives courage to other people to voice their independent thoughts. And that independent thinker might see something that's really true and valuable. So the only way to avoid these kind of cognitive errors is to be aware of how common they are. Realize the situations when they're likely to occur. Be vigilant to when that situation arises, and to be courageous to be an independent thinker. Through all of this, I think you can become better thinkers. It's helped me personally, I can tell you. This has made me a better thinker, more responsive to facts, more responsive to opinions that may differ from me, and more confident when I do arrive at an opinion, more confident in arriving at a more nuanced opinion of things. It's really helpful. So I recommend you try thinking about these and applying this knowledge in your everyday life.